Every format needs its meme deck, something that flies in the face of traditional deck building to facilitate one incredibly specific line. For example, in Commander there are plenty of decks, like Tomer from MTG Goldfish's Sanar list, that's all lands, save for a combo that Sanar can spin into. Or in Pauper, the infamous 5-land spy, or sometimes even 1-land spy decks, with almost no lands so that the titular Balustrade Spy can mill your entire library in one go, setting up the win con. Lots of these are really dumb, with no way of recovering if disrupted, while others are legitimate threats in their formats. My pet format of choice is Clover, which is young enough that it's sort of a wild west of deck building and a brewer's paradise of potential. So I knew that I had to jump at the opportunity to create an original meme deck for the format that takes advantage of what makes Clover truly unique. Clover has similarities with a ton of different formats. It's a singleton format that uses a legendary creature that starts in the command zone and sets your deck's color identity, like Commander. But it uses 60-card deck that's limited to a single rarity, like Pauper. In this case, your deck can only consist of uncommons. Despite this, it also has something wholly its own. The Lucky Clover. Your Lucky Clover is a card in the deck that breaks the singleton rule, which you instead run 4 copies of. This gives us a great starting point for our meme deck. If we can find a Clover that combos with our commander, we can reliably assemble those 2 pieces every game. Now, there are a lot of directions to go if that's all we're trying to do, but I want something incredibly stupid. Something that requires the rest of the deck to be warped around the combo. So I started by looking for cards that reveal the top of your library until seeing either a land or a non-land, just like with the previously mentioned Sanar and Balustrade Spy. For the record, Sanar is a rare and Balustrade Spy is a common, so both of these are out of the question. There is Undercity Informer, which is arguably a better version of Balustrade Spy, but I ended up going in a completely different direction. Solstice Revelations is a card from the Avatar set, which I've toyed around a lot with in Standard, but has never had that big of an impact. It's a 3-mana instant that has us exile cards in the top of our library until we hit a non-land card. Then it checks if that card's mana value is less than the number of mountains we control. If it is, we cast it for free. Notably, that's less than, not equal to or less than, unlike most other effects in Magic. This means if Solstice Revelations is our Clover and we have 4 mountains, hitting a second copy will let us continue flipping until we find our real target. Okay, so now we have a Clover that if we run only lands and one other specific card, we can always spin into that card and cast it for free. But if that's the only benefit, why wouldn't we just make that card the Clover? Well, first, if that card has 2 or less mana, it's actually not legal as a Clover since there's a stipulation that it needs to be a 3 or greater mana value spell. But in my case, I do want to hit a 3-mana spell anyway. Really, I wanted to see if I could take advantage of not just spinning into a free spell, but the actual process of exiling our entire library. I unfortunately couldn't find a hit or a commander that cared about watching cards get exiled, but unlike most effects like this, the exiled cards don't get tucked onto your library afterwards. They instead stay exiled. And there is a very famous card that appreciates our library being emptied. That's right, we have Thassa's Oracle at home in the form of Laboratory Maniac. Laboratory Maniac, affectionately known as Labman, says if you would draw a card from an empty library, instead win the game. Now, as you might have realized, if we cast Labman off of Solstice Revelations, we likely still have half our library left yet to get exiled. This is where our commander comes in. Originally, I built this deck around Rutha, Mercurial Artist. With Rutha, we could copy our Solstice Revelations on the stack, have the copy exile our library until we hit Labman, then have the original continue exiling cards until the library is empty. Then we just need to draw a card to win. In testing, I really liked how they're a 1/4 that can block during the early game, but they weren't proactive enough until the combo turn, so I started looking for an alternative. That's when I found Professor Zay, Anthropologist. Zay was perfect. Despite being an 0/3 instead of a 1/4, he's still a decent early game blocker, but additionally, he can be tapped to discard a card, then draw a card, helping us curate our hand before we're ready to go off. While he can't copy the spell in the stack, instead, he has a second ability that lets him return a spell from our graveyard to our hand. So now, if we cast Solstice Revelations on an opponent's end step, we can untap and return that spell to our hand during our upkeep, then recast it before moving to the draw step. Coincidentally, he's also an Avatar card, making this an accidental theme deck involving 2 Avatar cards and the premise of sending our entire library into exile, which I'm told is basically what happens to him in the show. So that's the plan. Cast Zay on 2, dig for Solstice Revelations, cast it with 4 mountains on the field to cheat out Labman, recast Solstice Revelations, emptying our entire library, move to our draw step, and win. Now, I'm not going to pretend this isn't just a silly meme deck. If you get disrupted, you probably can't recover, but this build gave me an excuse to look through all the utility lands available in Clover, and it turns out this format has a ton of good ones. Before I continue, if you don't count the cost of basics and want the ultimate budget option, you could skip the utility lands and build this deck for about $1.50. If you go that route, you have no way of really playing the game at all until your combo turn, and need to wait for everyone to tap out since you can't fight your way through interaction. That's largely true anyway, but our utility lands smooth things out a lot. First, we have extra card draw. Cycling lands or lands that can sacrifice to draw are our bread and butter. Early, they can help us draw into our combo, but they can also be used to draw a card in response to any removal targeting Labman. Now, this only works if your library is already empty, so let's hope your opponents wait so they can watch you deck yourself. In all honesty, if you're playing against this deck, I'd recommend killing Labman while the second Solstice Revelations is on the stack. In that event where your opponents manage to kill Labman, we only have one utility land that can help us recover, and that's Eden, Seat of the Sanctum. Eden can be sacrificed to return a permanent card from your graveyard to your hand, which is the only way to recur Labman in this deck. I was really hoping to find more options, but beggars can't be choosers. Ideally though, we don't end up in either of those scenarios. Your best bet is to watch your opponent's mana closely and wait for an opportunity to strike. Fortunately, we have a couple lands to help with that too. While most land destruction these days lets our opponent replace the destroyed land with an untapped basic, cards like Strip Mine just remove it entirely, so sniping an untapped land can deny that last mana an opponent would have needed to stop us on the combo turn. Personally, I don't run Strip Mine because I use a strict cost per card budget in all of my brews, so in my list you'll instead see the much worse Tectonic Edge. I'm also running the cheeky Blink Mothwell, which can tap down a non-creature artifact. I don't really expect to get anyone with this, but if tapping a Soul Ring is the difference between winning and losing, I'm going to be happy to have it. All this combines to make a surprisingly resilient combo. Still a meme, but not the worst meme. The rest of the deck is ways to be proactive or not die during the game before we're set up. It's got lands that can ramp us, lands that can be played as creatures, lands that are removal, and lands that we can use for politics. A great example of that last point is Rogue's Passage. We have no creatures in our entire deck that would want to be made unblockable, but what we can do is use it to help one opponent take out another that we otherwise couldn't deal with. That's exactly the kind of play that makes this deck feel surprisingly good in practice, letting us actually play the game in an impactful way with just lands. Now, as a pure combo deck, if you actually give it a try, here's my advice for the best overall experience. If it's turn 4 and you're ready to win, there's a decent chance your opponents won't notice, tap out, and the game could be over right then and there. This is boring. Instead, I highly recommend being incredibly vocal with this deck. Staying quiet and trying to sneak a win might increase your win rate, but it's not really fun. Instead, remind everyone that if they tap out, you could just win with no way of stopping you. Put that out into the air and see what happens. If your opponents start leaving up mana, you've slowed down their tempo with nothing more than your words. Most likely, you don't have the win on turn 4, so this gives you more time to set up. But if you do, and they choose to ignore your words, well, you've warmed the table. You've gotten to engage with the other players, establish pressure, and play in the space before winning. In my eyes, that makes the win feel all the more deserved.